Hello, good day to one and all. This is Miss A. Krishna Sundar, Assistant Professor, Department of English, KAHM Unity Women's College, Manjeri. Today we are going to discuss Aristotle and his Poetics. We had already covered two video lectures based on this, and we have covered 10 chapters. So here we go with chapter 11 onwards. So we have already discussed peripeteia and anagnorisis in the previous chapter. So this is actually a repetitive point that is coming in chapter 11. In chapter 11, Aristotle talks about the structure of the plot in a tragedy. And this structure of the plot will take into consideration three different elements in order to make it a tragedy. So these three elements are peripeteia, anagnorisis, and suffering. We have already discussed peripeteia and anagnorisis. Now, peripeteia is a climax, which means a sudden change of fortune because everything changes. So, there is a reversal of situation which is happening. And sometimes the hero believes in something and suddenly the opposite is happening. So, sometimes his belief is completely shaken off. The best example would be Oedipus Rex, written by Sophocles, which is again a Greek play. Now, in the story, the messenger comes with a glad news about his secret of birth. Now, the messenger thinks that this news will make Oedipus happy. But Oedipus understands the reality in this case, which means the news is not a good news for Oedipus, but instead it is only going to make him more worried. Because when he realizes that his belief about his parentage is not true, he conducts an investigation based on that, and at the end of the investigation, he realizes that the prediction which the Delphi of Oracle had given has come true because Oedipus had killed his father and he has married his mother. So this reality comes at the end. So this is in fact a boomerang kind of device, something like a tragic irony. So the desired effect is not created, but instead the opposite effect is created. The same happens with Duncan's murder in Macbeth. So there is a sudden reversal of situation and the result was not what Macbeth had intended. Now comes anagnorisis, which we had already discussed. This is a discovery of a fact. So in the case of Oedipus Rex, Oedipus realizes that he has killed his father and married his mother. So as a result of this discovery, the hero suffers from a lot of things. So as an audience or as a part of audience, you can witness murder, torture, pain, loss, etc. on stage. So this is what you call as suffering. So peripeteia, anagnorisis, and suffering, all these three elements are important for a tragedy. So just to brush up your memory, anagnorisis is a moment of insight, a shift from ignorance to knowledge. So you realize something which is really important or something which you never realized until that moment. It is in fact a literary device which creates a turning point of events, or in other words, it acts as a catalyst. So sometimes it is a character's identity that is revealed, a turn of belief, or sometimes a birthright. Now, the best example would be the character Jon Snow in Game of Thrones, because he believes that he is a bastard, but at the end of the story, he realizes that he is the rightful heir to the throne, that is the Iron Throne. So, similarly, Oedipus here realizes something about his parentage. So, this is the final part of tragedy where the downfall begins or suffering begins. So, moving into the next chapter. Now, before moving into the next chapter, I would like to take you towards a few pictures. Now, this is Theatre of Dionysus. This is a painted version of the Theatre of Dionysus. Now, here is a real picture. Now, you can see the place where the drama was enacted. You can also see the seating arrangement, which is in fact very, very huge. And remember, this was something which was constructed thousands and thousands of years before in Athens, Greece. So this is again the same theater from another angle. So now the question comes, why is it known as a theater of Dionysius? Now Dionysius is a god of wine in Greek mythology, and ancient plays were enacted during the feast of Dionysius, because during the feast of Dionysius Athens had a period of celebration, which means most of the people in Greece traveled to Athens to witness and watch these plays. All the educational systems, or all the banks and all the shops, all these things were closed during the celebration period, and even prisoners were released from prisons because they too had the right to watch the plays which are being enacted here. So, this is just the history of how this evolved from Greece. So, moving on to the next chapter, this is chapter 12, Parts of Greek Theatre. Now, please do not get confused with parts of tragedy, because parts of tragedy again has got six elements. Similarly, parts of Greek theater too consist of six elements. But remember, they are different. Parts of tragedy means it includes plot, character, thought, etc., which we had already covered and discussed. But parts of Greek theater means it is about the different structural dimensions of Greek theater. It is a convention to divide drama into acts and scenes. So the first part is known as prologue, which is the initial part which precedes the chorus. So we'll get into more details regarding the term chorus in the coming chapters. Then comes parode. This is the entrance song of chorus. So chorus had an important role in Greek theatre. Then comes episode. Now this is something between two chorus. So between two episodes there would be a chorus. So this is how it works. So in simple words, this is what you call as a present day act, because today a play is divided into different acts and each act would be divided into different scenes. Then comes tasimen, which is a choric ode, which means it would be a song which is addressed to the character, the main character, or sometimes some minor characters, or sometimes generally to the audience. Then comes kamos, which is a joint lamentation of chorus and actors. So, as you can imagine, this would come at the end of the tragedy, because this lamentation or this kind of a disappointment comes when the hero is suffering after peripetia and anagnorisis might take place. Then comes the last part, which is exort, the last part of tragedy after the last chorus song. So, with this, the tragedy will come to an end. So, these are the six parts of Greek theatre. Now comes chapter 13. This is the tragic hero or the Aristotelian hero. And as you can see, this is one of the most important chapters in Poetics. So Aristotle actually defines certain necessary qualities required for the tragic hero. But today, these qualities are not necessary to become a tragic hero. So let's analyze the Aristotelian hero. So the hero of a tragedy should be of noble birth, someone like a king or a noble, which means he should have a position or a place in a society. He should be a well recognized man in society. He should be having prosperity, name, and fame. At the same time, he is not a very, very popular kind of figure, but an ordinary man with all human qualities. And that is why he says an intermediate person. So the hero receives an undeserved misfortune. So something should happen, only then it would be known as a tragedy. And these misfortunes should emerge from his own actions. So the hero should become a part of those actions which can create the downfall of his own character. And there is a new term which is coming here, which is known as hamartia. Now, hamartia means a tragic flaw, which means a simple mistake. It is otherwise known as an error of judgment. This misfortune should evoke pity and fear. So, there is a simple mistake committed by the hero, and this mistake will trigger the remaining sufferings of the hero, and this Suffering would evoke pity and fear, and this would finally bring catharsis to the audience. So, we have discussed catharsis, how the purgation of emotions can work. We have gone through that in the initial session. So, a tragedy can become a tragedy only when it can produce this catharsis. So, the hero, the tragic hero, should neither be too good or bad. He should stand somewhere in the middle area as an intermediate person. He should be eminently good, but at the same time, he shouldn't be completely perfect and he shouldn't be completely bad. Now, Aristotle rejects tragic comedies and double plots because he always believed that in the case of a tragic hero, the actions can be emphasized only if the plot goes in a linear way. So, again, the best example here would be Oedipus Rex. So, again, there are three plots that Aristotle is against. We'll come into that later. So, now let's analyze this term, hamartia. Hamartia has been defined by different people, and there are lots of controversies which are still remaining. Now, Bradley interpreted it as tragic flow, some kind of a mistake or a weakness. Now, we all know that human beings would definitely possess something called a weakness. There is no human being who could be considered as perfect. So it is not a moral defect, but an error of judgment. Sometimes you trust someone too much, or sometimes you take a hasty decision. Sometimes you become impulsive. So they are just common mistakes of an ordinary human being. The entire tragedy but would emerge from this minor flaw. So it is not a moral drawback and it is not considered as a great mistake. Now, the best examples would be the character Ned Stark from Game of Thrones. If you look at Ned Stark's character, he's actually a very good man with a lot of principles and ideals. But his problem was that he was very honest, very, very honest, and it is his honesty that finally puts him towards his own downfall. He is finally killed, so it is really a tragedy, and his tragedy happens because of his honesty. So, even if you're becoming too much honest, that can be considered as a tragic flaw. So, it was honesty which triggered the downfall of Ned Stark in Game of Thrones. If you look at Macbeth, William Shakespeare's Macbeth. In the case of Macbeth, he was very, very ambitious. Very, very ambitious, and it was this ambition which brings his downfall. Then comes the character Achilles. It was pride. Achilles was very proud, and it was pride which created the downfall of Achilles. So there would be something or the other which can be considered as a tragic flaw. If you look at Hamlet, in the case of Hamlet, the tragic flaw was vacillation. Vacillation is actually being flexible, not very consistent. And the other one was procrastination. Now, procrastination is actually delaying things. So, these were the tragic flaws of Hamlet: vacillation and procrastination. Okay, so now moving on. Aristotle says there are three kinds of plots which should be avoided. Aristotle says a perfect good man will not be an ideal tragic hero. Now imagine a perfect good man. There is no fault with this man, a completely perfect good man. If he falls from happiness to misery, what would be the reaction of the common people? What would be the reaction of the audience? Because we all believe in a natural system, right? All of us, let it be of any religion, any culture, all human beings believe in something called as poetic justice, which means if you do good things, you would be rewarded. If you do bad things, you would be punished. So, this is a common principle on which the entire world is running. So, in that scenario, imagine if there is a perfect good man, a very, very good man, and if that good man falls from happiness to misery, we will lose faith in the entire system of this world. We will lose faith in religion. We will lose faith in justice. We will lose faith in God. So, if a completely perfect man falls from happiness to misery, It is not tragedy that might happen, but you will lose faith in everything around you. So that is not a good idea. This is what Aristotle says. Now look at the second one, a bad man who is falling from happiness to misery. Now, if the character is a real bad man, and if that bad man is falling from happiness to misery, what would be the reaction of the audience? Now imagine, look at the earlier Bollywood movies where you can say Amrish Puri always comes in a villainous role. Now at the end of the story, mostly Amrish Puri will be killed or he would be thrashed by the hero. Now what is our reaction when the villains are getting thrashed or when the villains are getting exposed? We get some kind of satisfaction, right? So if a bad man is falling from happiness to misery, it is not going to be tragic. On the other hand, we would be happy telling that he deserves it. So this cannot be considered as a tragedy. So this will not give the effect of pity and fear, and therefore a bad man falling from happiness to misery will never be tragic. Now imagine the opposite of this, a bad man falling from misery to happiness. If a very bad man is moving towards happiness, in the first place, it cannot be called as tragedy because tragedy would end in misery and not in happiness. So, in the first place, it is not a tragedy. On the second place, if a bad man is moving from misery to happiness, you will again lose trust in this world. So, this is what happens. Now, there is a fourth category, a perfect good man falling from misery to happiness. The first one is from happiness to misery, but there is a fourth category, a perfect good man falling from misery to happiness. And in that case, he is falling from misery towards happiness. So it is a happy ending, and that cannot be considered as a tragedy. However, Aristotle is not talking about that fourth option. So now moving on to chapter 14. The next one is spectacle. Now see, as we have discussed in the introduction, Aristotle is not going through a linear pattern in his poetics because he brings a lot of digression in between. He deviates from what he is discussing. He suddenly brings in some unwanted topics. So this is how poetics is actually moving forward. So we started discussing the formative parts of tragedy, if you remember. In the second video lecture, we discussed the different parts of tragedy: plot, character, thought, etc. Now, Aristotle discusses all those things and then he comes into the plot structure like anagnorisis, peripetia, suffering, etc. And now suddenly he moves back to the formative parts and now he starts discussing spectacle. Now, spectacle is considered as a source of tragic emotion. Now, what is the main idea of a tragedy? A tragedy should evoke pity and fear, and a spectacle is usually used or it is used as a source just to emphasize this pity and fear on stage. So, proper pleasure actually should be independent of spectacle. This is what Aristotle says, which means if it is a real tragedy, even if you are not watching it on stage, even if you are reading it in a book, as we all do, because we can never watch the live plays. So, in most of the cases, when we have a play in the syllabus, we are actually going through the play, we read the play. So, Aristotle says if a tragedy is a real tragedy with all the qualities of a tragedy, even reading a tragedy can give you proper pleasure, which means even without stage settings, even without the spectacle, you can have that satisfaction. So, spectacle is only just an extra or an additional kind of source in order to emphasize pity and fear. So, spectacle can come only when you are staging a play. It comes as a stage setting, it comes as a visual display. For example, when a disaster is displayed on stage, a murder is happening, or someone is killing somebody, or an accident is happening. So you have to create that setting. So it's something like a visual display. Now, in the case of Oedipus Rex, the play, the last part of the story goes like this. Oedipus is actually blinding himself. So that is a very scary kind of scene, and this is what you call as spectacle because this intensifies the pity and fear that is being evoked. Now, even if you read it with sequences and structure, It should give you the full effect of drama. And that is why sometimes, even when you read some books, you cry. So it is not really necessary that you have to watch it as a movie or as a drama to cry. Even when you read some books, you cry. So proper pleasure should be independent of spectacle. Even without spectacle, you can get that satisfaction of a tragedy. So I would like to take you towards the stage settings of some plays. So you can see this is really important because it gives you more effect. Now you might know, if you have gone for C zone, B zone, etc., usually the drama competitions might happen only after evening. Normally it is like that. The reason is that because only then the stage setting can come into its beauty, because you need light settings, you need to keep all these stage props, etc. So it gets the real beauty only when it is dark. So usually these drama or the plays are actually staged when it is in open air. It is staged usually when it is dark. So you can see the setting here. Now again, you can see another picture here. You can see the beautiful setting behind. Again, you can see the first one is actually the interior part of a house. So this is something like a modern drama. Again, you can see the trees behind. So it's something like a natural environment. Again, moving on to character and its features. Now, Aristotle says when you present a character, there are four elements that you should concentrate on. Now, see, this is not just for the tragic hero, this is not just for the protagonist, this is applicable for all characters that you portray in a tragedy. First of all, characters should be good. Second thing, the characters should be appropriate. The third one, characters should be true to life. And fourth one, characters should be consistent. So characters should be good, appropriate, true to life, and finally, it should be consistent. So let's get into the details. Now, what do you mean by the term characters should be good? Now, by the term good, Aristotle means that the words and actions of the characters should be good, because during the ancient period, people used to take messages from the plays which were enacted. They used to carry this message home. So that is why Aristotle says the words and deeds of the characters should be good. Now, thousands of years before, this was a period when women and slaves were considered as inferiors. Even if you look at Shakespearean period, you can see women never wrote during the Elizabethan period. Now, Elizabethan period is not very far from us. It was just 400, 500 years before. So just a couple of centuries back, 16th century, even in 16th century, women were not allowed to write, and women never participated as characters on stage. So imagine thousands of years before in Greece, women and slaves were treated as inferiors. But though they were treated as inferiors, their presentations should not be wicked in nature. It shouldn't be in a negative light. This is what Aristotle says. Now, the second thing, the characters should be appropriate, means they should maintain their status. If you are portraying the character of a king, his dress, his actions, his words, everything should pertain to the status which he is occupying. So that is appropriate. Now, there is another term called anachronism. I don't know whether you have come across this term. Now, anachronism is also applicable when you speak about being appropriate. Now, anachronism is actually when you are not able to portray the real period kind of structural drama. For example, if you are portraying the old kings and queens in a drama, you cannot make them use mobile phones in between, right? Because you are actually showcasing a period drama which happened thousands of years before. And when you are showing the stage setting or the costumes, you have to be very careful about that. So This is what you call as anachronism, because when you find a mobile phone, for example, if you see a Hamlet or Macbeth using a mobile phone, you call that anachronism because that is not really a part of the real time story. So it becomes like an extraneous element, and people will lose the credibility when you watch these kind of things. Now imagine an earlier king, for example, Oedipus. Take the example of Oedipus. Imagine in Oedipus Rex, Oedipus is wearing a modern watch. So that is again anachronism. So it should be appropriate. Then comes characters should be true to life, which means even though you are narrating the story of a king or a noble or a great man or a hero, he should be having all the feelings that a human being would have, because this is the only thing that people can identify irrespective of culture, caste, and creed. Even though you come from different places, different religions, different cultures, we all share some universal emotions. For example, love, hatred, jealousy, sacrifice, respect. These are all emotions that every human being can share with another one. So, this is what you mean as true to life, because having all the human feelings. And the last one is characters should be consistent. Should be consistent means there should be some kind of a balance that is coming in the character. Now, if the character is inconsistent, the character must be consistently inconsistent. Now, it looks slightly confusing. Now, imagine a character who is inconsistent. Inconsistent means a shaky kind of character, one who says something now, one who says just the opposite in the next minute. So, that kind of an impulsive character who cannot be trusted. Now, if this is what you are showing, if this kind of a character is what you are showcasing in a drama, then suddenly you cannot make this character consistent. So, if you are portraying an inconsistent character, that portrayal should be consistent. So, it must be consistently inconsistent. If you're portraying an impulsive character, a character who changes in every minute, you as a writer should maintain that consistency in showing the character as inconsistent. So hope that is clear. So the four features would be: the characters must be good, the characters should be appropriate, they should be true to life, and finally they should be consistent. So with this we come to the end of this video lecture. We would continue with the remaining chapters in the next video lecture. So thank you very much for your patient listening. If you have any queries, if you have any doubts, if you need more assistance, please feel free to connect with me in my email ID. So thank you very much. Thank you once again. Thank you.